Hi there. In this video, we're going to run through my recommended campaign structure for running ads on Meta. And just for reference, I've linked this image in the video description below, so feel free to pull it up if this is too small. So minimizing my face and zooming in a bit here, first thing I want to mention is how the Meta algorithm has changed over the last few years. So initially, the Meta algorithm wasn't very good at aligning the creative that you were running with the audience that was most relevant to that specific creative. So in the past, the Meta account structures or Facebook ad account structures that would run were very hands-on and very segmented when it came to specific audience targeting. So initially, the recommended approach was to run, for example, a single campaign and then multiple ad sets within that specific campaign, and then obviously specific ads within each ad set. And then at the ad set level, you would specify or choose the specific audiences that you wanted to target with that specific ad set, and then obviously place the relevant ads in that ad set that you wanted to show to that specific audience, and then obviously assign a budget to that specific ad set. And that worked really well in the past, again, when the algorithm wasn't very good at aligning that specific creative with the relevant audience. But now the algorithm's got a lot better in terms of aligning that creative with the audience that suits that creative best. And therefore the account structure on Meta has changed quite a bit. And I want to run through my recommended approach, obviously, in this video. So just zooming out here, I'd recommend 3 campaign structures. Number 1 is a scaling campaign structure that looks something like this. So you've got your campaign, you've got a single ad set to broad targeting. So essentially Meta can show the creatives to whatever users or whichever audience it deems most relevant. And then you've got all of your ads in this single ad set. Now, just to reference, this is a scaling ad set. So any high performing creatives that emerge within your testing ad set, which is this one down here, which I'll touch on in a second, you then pull out via post ID into the specific scaling ad set over here. In terms of analyzing ad performance and determining whether an ad is a high performer or not, I've put a separate video to that in the video description below to ensure that we obviously stay on track with just the Meta account structure. So just quick recap: 1 campaign with 1 ad set, and then all of your high performing ads in that single ad set. So just to note that I will touch on exactly how the structure actually looks in Meta itself in just a second, but I just want to explain the logic behind these structures first. So I'll come back to specific campaign settings in a second as well. So the second campaign structure down here is the testing/scaling campaign. So I'd recommend using a single campaign with multiple ad sets within this campaign, and then obviously the campaign set to budgets adjusted at the ad set level, allowing you to assign a specific budget to each ad set, and then you can obviously place your specific ads in each ad set. And I'll come back to why this is effective in a second. And then the third campaign structure down here is the sale campaign structure, and very similar structure to the scaling/testing campaign up here. So again, a single campaign with budgets adjusted at the ad set level, and you can have multiple ad sets in here with the relevant creative in each. Again, also all set to broad targeting. Now to touch on the approach here. So diving into this first structure up at the top over here. So this is obviously the scaling structure, and the benefit of this is you've obviously got a single budget set at the campaign level, a single ad set, and you've got all of your ads within this 1 ad set. Now on Meta, and just in general across any advertising platform, the more you can consolidate, the better, because anytime you can have more spend going through fewer structures, you have all of that data getting built up in a single campaign. Obviously more data is able to get built up within each campaign structure or specific structure the more you consolidate. And generally speaking, the more data you have within a specific structure, the better it will optimize and the better it will perform. So that's the benefit of this specific scaling structure. You've got all of your spend going through a single ad set, and Meta can essentially pull or choose from any of the ads within this specific ad set and build the best possible sequence that it deems most relevant to your existing audience. So for example, showing ad 8 first, ad 6 second, ad 2 third, etc. That might be the best sequence to get users to engage. Obviously, the more you restrict the more you restrict the number of ads you place in a single ad set, the smaller the database is for Facebook to pull from in terms of what creative to show to a certain user at what stage of their journey. Now, this top scaling structure is great, but there are some downfalls downfalls to this. And the main one is that Meta is obviously in complete control over which creatives get allocated spend within the campaign. So a lot of times what you'll see is Meta will pull out, depending on how much you're spending, anywhere from 1 to, let's say, 5 or 6 high performing creatives within this full set of creative, and those will get 80 to 90% of the spend, and the rest of the creatives in that ad set won't get anything. What you'll see over time though is as these top creatives fatigue, naturally they'll start getting allocated less and less spend, and these, I guess, lower spend allocation creatives will start creeping up in terms of the amount of spend that they're getting allocated by Meta. Now, if for example Meta is prioritizing a specific ad within your ad set that, let's say, is not performing amazingly well, but you still want to keep that creative active, there's no way to kind of restructure this campaign to suit that scenario. Now, in terms of analyzing creative performance and ad performance, I'll put a full video to that in the video description below, just to avoid getting distracted in this video. Now, the benefit of having this second scaling/testing ad set down here is if you have a creative that's spending a lot within your scaling ad set or your scaling campaign, it's spending a lot, but it's not performing amazingly well. So you still want to run that creative, but you don't want it to get allocated that much spend. You can essentially turn that off here and launch that into its own ad set with a specific set budget in the scaling/testing campaign down here. So in this scenario, let's say take that specific winner creative or high spend allocation creative, launch that into its own ad set and assign a specific budget to that. And that's the benefit of having both of these structures from a scaling perspective. Then from a testing perspective, when testing creative, we can't really test creative effectively in a campaign structure like this, because naturally the high performers will get prioritized in terms of spend allocation. And if we launch new test creatives into this structure, they'll simply sit at the bottom of the campaign and not get allocated any spend. And that's where, again, this scaling/testing campaign comes into play, where we can essentially launch a separate ad set, assign a specific budget to that, and then launch those new creatives into that separate ad set, and then see how these creatives perform in comparison to the top performing creatives in the scaling ad set here. Obviously, if they perform well, then you can duplicate or pull those out via post ID. Again, another video on how to do that in the video description, and launch those ads again using that post ID in the scaling campaign up here. You can obviously continue running this individual ad set until these ads fatigue from a performance perspective, and then you can go ahead and turn that specific ad set off. And then lastly, just with regards to the sale approach down here. So first thing to note is that sale creatives will naturally perform a lot better than evergreen creative from a in-platform metric perspective, because you are promoting obviously a very attractive offer specifically for the middle of funnel or audience that has already interacted with your brand. And therefore, Facebook will prioritize sale creative quite heavily in terms of spend allocation, because the interaction with that creative from your existing audience is very high, because it's such an attractive offer. So ideally, to avoid skewing your evergreen structures, so the structures that run all year round, you ideally want to keep all sale creative separate from your evergreen structures. So you can either do that by launching a separate sale ad set in your testing/scaling campaign here. So your sale ad set with a relevant budget and then the relevant sale creatives, or what I recommend doing is creating a separate sale campaign with individual ad sets with individual budgets, and then you can obviously allocate certain budget to certain sale creatives, and obviously ensure that that's kept completely separate to your evergreen campaigns to avoid everything kind of getting turned on its head when you launch that sale creative, and then essentially turned on its head again when you turn that sale creative off, and then that spend has to be redistributed across the rest of the account. Now, following on from that, just to touch on the split between top of funnel and retargeting and how this is integrated or incorporated into this campaign structure. So obviously you want to ensure that you're reaching out to cold audiences and you're not spending budget on existing customers or overspending budget on engaged audiences to maximize obviously the effectiveness and overall reach of your ad spend. Now, just to note, kind of following what I mentioned in another video which is on my channel with regards to the overall eCom approach, the amount of returning customer revenue that you get, or the retention side of your business, in my opinion, is not heavily tied to paid ads. It's more heavily tied to the actual experience and return on investment that the customer received on their first purchase. Obviously, they essentially invested in your product through their their purchase and their time involved in testing the product, etc., if they didn't see a positive return on their investment, no matter how many ads you serve them, they're not going to come back and buy. There are some instances where spending on returning customers or that existing customer audience is useful, but this is more for the case, or more in the case of large fashion brands or clothing brands, for example, that have a lot going on with their product catalog. They're doing a lot of product releases, and there's just a lot going on with their business. And it's simply not possible for the average customer to kind of keep up to date with what the brand's doing simply through email marketing and organic socials, which are obviously free ways of keeping on top of your existing customer audience, which I'd recommend prioritizing. So in that case, it makes sense to spend on that existing customer audience. But for the majority of brands, I'd highly recommend excluding that existing customer audience completely. So kind of tying that into the campaign structure here. So in terms of audience exclusions across all of your ad sets, I'd recommend always excluding your existing customers, so 180-day purchases. And then I actually forgot to add in the second aspect here, which is your customer list synced through from Klaviyo or whatever email provider you're using as a way to get that Shopify data in terms of existing customers into Facebook ads. So in terms of audience targeting, just to summarize this, I'd recommend always using broad targeting and then excluding all existing customers. So 180-day purchases and then your customer list. Now, in terms of targeting your engaged user base, so people who have visited your website or people who have potentially interacted with your Facebook page, interacted with your Insta page, or subscribed to your email list, we obviously don't want to exclude those from the campaign because it's highly likely that a consumer would need to have multiple touch points with the brand before actually going ahead and making their first purchase. So it's essential that we keep targeting these people, but we want to ensure that we're not overspending on these engaged audiences. Now, one thing to note here is you can separate or can potentially separate your retargeting out into a separate campaign completely, but I wouldn't recommend that in a majority of cases because it kind of breaks the sequence of how users are shown ads. For example, if in the scaling campaign here, Facebook sees the ideal user journey as a customer or potential customer seeing ad 8 first, ad 6, then they click over to the website, then they see ad 4 down here, which is, more product specific, maybe ad 3 here, which is more pricing specific, and then they click through from there and actually go and purchase. If you separate all of these creatives out into different campaigns, it's very difficult for Meta to build that sequence in terms of what ads are shown to potential customers when. And that's why in the majority of cases, I'd recommend including this retargeting or middle of funnel or engaged user audience into your top of funnel campaigns to ensure that the sequencing is still held strong. However, you still need visibility over how much you're spending on these engaged users. And that's where the audience definitions feature comes in. So if you go into the Meta Ads dashboard and under the breakdown section, you select audience segments. As you can see here, based on how you define these specific audiences, it'll tell you how much spend is getting allocated to each of these audiences. And I've put a separate video as well in the video description on how to actually set this up. And this way you'll be able to accurately see how much is getting spent on each of those specific audiences. Then just in terms of campaign settings, I'd always recommend only using the conversion campaign or conversion bidding type, either optimizing towards conversion volume or conversion value, just depending on whatever suits your model best. And then obviously always optimizing towards purchase as the specific conversion action that you're targeting. Always recommend using the 7-day click attribution setting. Again, reason is a separate video linked in the video description as well. And the same goes for the rest of the the rest of the campaigns over here as well. So that was an overview of the structure, just to quickly outline how this looks in Meta Ads. So these are the 3 campaigns here. Obviously 1 sale, 1 cold targeting, and 1 scaling. This is just my personal account, which obviously has nothing active in yet. I'm just using this as an example. And then if we go into the specific campaign settings, for example, cold targeting here, which is that scaling/testing campaign. As you can see, we've got multiple ad sets in here with multiple ads under each ad set. And then the budget, as you can see here, needs to be set to the ad set level, so that, for example, if you go into the individual ad set here, as you can see, we have the option to allocate budget at the individual ad set level. Then second, heading into the scaling campaign over here, as you can see, we've got all of our high performing ads under this single ad set, and then we've got our budget controlled at the campaign level over here. And then just heading into the final sale campaign over here, as you can see, individual ad sets for this as well, the individual sale ads within the specific ad set. And then every sale you run, you can just simply duplicate that specific ad set and obviously create a new ad set per sale. So that was it for this video. Hopefully you got some value out of this. Please leave any questions or feedback below in the comments, and thanks again for your time.